All right. Welcome back to the Coming Together podcast. This week, talk about a couple things. One thing that happened was I was somehow, I don't know how this happened, but I was in the dictionary app looking up a word, and then I noticed the articles that they have, and I was like, oh, how interesting, they have articles. Let's see what they have. And dictionary.com, they ran this article. I actually didn't see who authored it, and it was from 2023, so it was a year old, but they were rerunning it, and it was astronomy versus astrology, and they were basically saying that astrology is not a science. And just reading the article initially, it gets my undies in a bundle a little bit, even though I know this is how it is. It just kind of gets my goat a little. And the thing is, it's because whoever wrote that article, and I've read many of them, they're writing it like they're trying to tell the general public that astrology is not really a science. And then within the article, they're actually proving that they're not even scholarly themselves because they're saying all these things that aren't true about astrology. Now, one of the big things that I noticed is they immediately talk about how astrologers are working on correlations to stars and constellations and celestial spheres. And then, just for the record, sun sign astrology has nothing to do with the stars or constellations. The big three that you know in your chart, most likely in the West, have nothing to do with the constellations or stars. And the entire evolutionary astrology paradigm that I practice, taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green, has absolutely nothing to do with the stars and constellations. I mean, we can include and add them, but it is just the planets and where they fall in relationship to the Earth. And that relationship to the Earth is defined by two spheres. One, the ascendant, descendant, and the MCIC, which set up the axes of the chart, and from there the 12 houses. And in evolutionary astrology, we use a house system called porphyry. So whatever the relationship between the ascendant and the midheaven is, that distance is equally divided by 3, and all 4 quadrants are equally divided by 3 based on those axes. We can't make up those axes. They exist. So the houses are the houses where they are. And then the signs are not the constellations, of course. And I've talked about this many times, but I have my model. And if you're not watching the video podcast, I have this image as the cover photo for the podcast. And this is my little model of Earth here. And what I've always been telling people is the Western tropical zodiac that we use is actually this energy field around the planet. And it lines up with the axes of the planet. So the North Pole kind of more or less points at 0 degrees Cancer, and the South Pole here by my hand points down at 0 degrees Capricorn. And wherever an object is in space around the Earth, if the energy is coming in, perpendicular to this plane of the axes, it's going to be, Aries Cancer or Virgo Libra. And that's how we determine what sign and what degree a body's in. So, and it's literally like this energy field around the planet. And I think I got into this in an introduction to planetary nodes talk, because I was just explaining how this Western tropical zodiac works. And one of the things that makes sense to me is that the sphere of the Earth meets its orbital plane, and that forms a circle. The circle, by its very nature, divides itself by 6 and 12, also divides itself by 2, 4. And so to me, looking at like the seed of life pattern, which is the 6 circles around the 1, it's this perfect geometric pattern that literally represents the 6 yin and 6 yang energy phases that any circle has. And in a sense, any cycle has, by the nature of it being circular. Most people who know astrology don't understand that the signs are this energy field around the planet that happen to line up with the constellations 2,000 years ago and are processioning backwards. So anyway, that article, it's just like, and then they're saying astrology is not a science. And so I'm like, well, okay, well, what's the definition of science? Here's the definition I looked up. This is just on my little computer dictionary app. An intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Okay. And then there's a particular area of science, i.e. veterinary science, or the agricultural sciences. Another definition is a systematically organized body of knowledge on a particular subject. So for those of us that know astrology, we know that there's dabbling and there's getting into different systems, but then there's this very kind of, I guess I see as a necessary thing, which is to fully understand one system and the methods that they're in and the structure of that system. And one of the things that Jeffrey Wolf Green would always say is that evolutionary astrology is based on observation and correlation. And so we have this systematic system that we can't really make up where the planets fall when someone's born, and then we observe and correlate. And now, to me, that kind of makes sense that it is a science. And the quote, more scientific left-brain people, rational-minded people that I've talked to that have had a hard time kind of accepting what astrology might be, the thing that I always come back to is it's truly kind of insane. It's insane for us to say that as above, so below is actually true, that the universe actually is holographic, and there's this whole way that you can have a map to your entire psyche and soul. That's insane. It's insane. But, and a lot of the greatest minds in the world, some of them are like pure geniuses and have studied astrology for a lifetime. And, we're not stupid. We're not trying to pull stuff out of our butt and just correlate randomly things here. Been doing this for 25 years, and the reason is because there's something there. I have correlated and observed using the same system and method thousands of times. So yeah, those articles just get me a little Anyway, that's my little rant on that. And I do think that another one of the misconceptions around astrology in the popular realm still, first it was rooted in, the sun sign astrology, and perhaps a misunderstanding of the sun itself. In the EA paradigm, the moon is our personality, our identity, our ego. The sun is the expression of it. Now, obviously, big three has become more popular and common, although the moon does have different different interpretations and meanings in different systems of astrology, and I don't know if other systems as fully use what EA uses around the ego and personality and identity with Moon as much, as very clearly centered around that. But that's just my like peripheral things I've noticed with that. But like what do people even think the sun represents when they say that their sun is in Sagittarius? So not even understanding like what we're talking about when you say your sun's in a sign is kind of problematic for having it have some validity. Now, another thing I've talked about in the past is that if you're born on the same day as someone, you share the same planetary node backdrop. And obviously, if your sun's in one sign, Mercury's either in that sign or the sign before or after it. Venus is either in that sign, one or two signs before, or one or two signs after. And so we always kind of have this potential blending of neighboring archetypes, which are drastically different. Aries and Taurus, for example, are extremely different. Aries is like at the gates, ready to go, and Taurus is the slowest to, tortoise in the hare, right? Slowest out of the gate, slow and steady wins the race. We have within us very different archetypal parts of our psyche, so to speak. Like we're such a complex beings that it's easy to see how we have different things and threads, and we have all 12 of these archetypes somewhere in our psyche. So I think it is really easy to be like, well, yeah, but also this and that, and now you may know this, but you may not know this, but I think that the technique for writing sun sign astrology columns is pretty fascinating, and it's intriguing, and it does have some merit, but obviously it's very limited in its scope. And that is, okay, so let's say we've got the sun in Sagittarius, and you're writing a column for sun in Sag, right? If it's for the week, you're going to use the rest of the planets in their relationship to Sagittarius. Like, oh, Jupiter, it's the ruler of Sag, is opposing it from Gemini. What does that mean? Oh, Saturn is in, Pisces and squaring your sun sign Sag. That could be challenging. What's that? What's that little T-square about right there? But it's just dealing with the sun, so it's limited. But you go through all of where the planets are by sign in relationship to the sun sign. That's a technique for writing a sun sign column, right? Now, there's another technique that's kind of similar, and I would say it's a little more rich, which is, I just ran into Nicholas, Sparkles of Gold, and he was telling me that he was going to do for 2025 a whole video of each rising sign forecast. And so when you have the rising sign forecast, it's kind of like the same thing as the sun sign, but you're so let's say somebody has Taurus rising, right? So it's kind of like a whole sign technique, basically similar to the sun sign thing. So if you have Taurus rising, then the Pluto in Aquarius is squaring your ascendant for the year, so to speak, energetically. Whether it could be like 20 years before it actually squares your ascendant, there is a certain energetic dynamic that begins once Pluto goes into Aquarius, because you have Taurus rising or Scorpio rising, right? And of course, we know that if we actually have a reading in a chart, there's a degree of intensity, and there's a window of a couple years where it's most potent. But and we may still have some of those energetic factors at play just by it entering the sign. So you go through, and I think Nicholas was saying he was going to do like Saturn on out, because to include the inner planets for all the signs that they move through each month in relation to each rising sign would be so much, right? So those are valid methods, and it's a way to get out a general, like, reading and forecast out to the general public, and you can go off of your rising sign or sun sign and get some good nuggets, to think about. Really, I'm excited that Nicholas is doing that, and I know that there's going to be some really good wisdom in there. Obviously, like, it's not the same as a chart reading, but anyway, that article got me thinking about all of these things. And like, there's sun sign astrology that's people pulling stuff out of their butt, and there's sun sign astrology where people are using a particular method, and some people are better at that method than others. But even the best sun sign astrological column is still going to be missing a lot of, like, the detailed, pinpointed, precise specificities of an individual's astrology. So it could be fun, and it's like, take it with a grain of sand, grain of salt. I gotta look that up. I always get that wrong. So anyway, there's that. I was telling somebody that I was going to tell the story of my name change. So I was going to do that today. For those curious, it's not too long of a story. It's a short story. I do like stories. And a brief story for you. So I had no desire to change my name. I've always liked my name. And it was in July, the summer, that I guess, like, for context, for those of you who don't know, I am a devotee of Neem Karoli Baba Hanuman, and that's kind of that is my spiritual path in this lifetime. So one thing that I do for inspiration is I read stories about other devotees' lives. And there was a week where I'll do, like, I'll have, one of the books is Miracle of Love. It's a whole bunch of stories about Neem Karoli Baba that was compiled by Ram Dass, and I kind of will even use it as slightly like a divination, where sometimes I'll just randomly open a book, book divination. I'm sure you've done that kind of thing, right? So I randomly opened it up, and I opened up to the story of somebody getting given a name. And it was interesting because it was just like, I've read those stories before, but for some reason on that day in July, I was really reflecting on it. I was thinking about it. Like, why was I thinking about it way more than I normally do? I don't know, but I mean, I have suspicions, but I was. And, I started thinking, like, that's interesting, like, that all these devotees and people have had name changes. And, like, would I ever change my name? Like, I don't know. I have no desire to change my name. How would I even know that I would be changing my name? Right? Not really sure. So I kind of noticed myself having this conversation, and I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then I went about my day. And then a couple days later, I came across, like, randomly, kind of the same time in the morning or something, getting going, uh, a post about a devotee and how they got their name and their new name. And I was like, oh, this is interesting coincidence that I just was having that whole conversation with myself, and then now I'm reading another thing about a name change. And, like, that's kind of, and I didn't really go further into it, but I just said, okay, noted. Um, hmm. Then the name change thing is coming up, like, why, I'm not really sure, but okay. And then, yeah, kind of went about my day. And then it was maybe a couple days later, I was visiting a friend where they were house sitting. So it was like a place I'd never gone before. It was very beautiful. And there was a hot tub in the back, and it was like later in the evening, so it was like dark out. I wasn't wearing my glasses. So, basically like blind. I mean, there's like silhouette of trees and things, and just chilling and hanging out and talking. And then the people who lived on, there was a main house and there was a back yurt, and then those people came home. And so my friend who was house sitting, kind of introduced themselves and was kind of fielding the communication and talking with them. And I just figured, it's dark, I don't know you, this is like my only time I'm ever here. I can't see, and I'm just gonna chill here in the hot tub. And that's what I did, except that there happened to be an outside shower that the people from the yurt used. So then the woman who came home to the yurt was like coming up and then talking to my friend again, and then walking, like, like 4 or 5 feet, like, next to me on the way to the shower. And then as she passed, she said, "And your name is?" And I said my name. And she turned back over her shoulder and said, "Redwood?" And of course I said, "No." And it was in that moment that I just kind of paused. And then I did say what my name was, my original name, Bradley. But it was kind of this moment, and then it stuck with me. And I was like, that's really weird that she thought I said Redwood. And the timing of it's really weird because I just read these two stories. And I had just been having this whole, like, process of, like, how would I know that I am being encouraged to change my name or being given a name? How would that even work? And so I started to kind of play with that. I was like, is this it? Is this a name? And so I was kind of working with that in my consciousness and kind of being like, kind of feels like it might be, but, like, how do I know? Like, I feel like I need to have, like, a little more validation, from the universe. And so I was kind of like, okay, I will sit with the possibility, but I'm not gonna, like, jump to conclusions that I was just given that name. But I'm gonna sit with it and think about it, and see what else happens if I get some kind of confirmation or not. And then it was a day or two later, I can't remember, I was leaving the house and I told the whole story to my daughter, and she thought that was all interesting. And then she was open to it, and she's like, "Oh yeah, oh cool." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. I'm just, maybe it is. I'm not sure." And then So I left, and then I'm driving away. While I'm driving into town, she texted me, and like the next sentence of the book she was reading had Redwood in it. So I was like, that's really ridiculous. Like, what, you know? So I was like, okay, that kind of seems like some confirmation there. That's kind of insane that that just happened. So I did take that as a sign. I was like, okay, I'm feeling less doubt about it. But I think I still had this, process of like, and it was kind of like slow. I went on a trip to Long Beach, and I was hanging out with some friends and telling them about it. And like right when I like mentioned the name, this string of lights turned on, and I was like, okay, that's weird timing, interesting timing. And um, decided on that trip to be like, okay, I think I'm gonna do it. I think this is. I'd gotten some other confirmations. I don't remember them all anymore, but there's kind of been a whole string of them. And another example was I came back and I had just decided and announced to everyone I work with for my name change. And one of my coworkers had been on a vacation, and then right when she came back, she had seen that. She's like, "Oh, that's so cool!" And she was wearing a shirt that just was like said Redwoods across it. And I was like, "Wow!" I'm like, "Look at your shirt. That's crazy. Like, what?" She's like, "Oh yeah, I just found this it was like in the mud on my camping trip." And so she happened to pull it out of the mud, take it home, clean it, and then she was wearing it, like right after I saw her after I got back. Um, and yeah, there's been a lot of those kind of little synchronicities, and so that's the story. And I will say, I had to pause that for a second. Sorry about that. Yeah, so that was the story of my name change. And last podcast I was talking about the before birth charts, and it's interesting. I had visited my friend Gray this week, and he was talking about how that is a Hellenistic technique that's very important, but they use it's either the before birth full moon or the before birth new moon. And in Dane Rogers' book, he had just spoken about looking at the new moon before birth. And when we pulled up my before birth new moon chart together and we were looking, this is something that I would not have known, but Gray knows these things. It was the exact heliacal, I think I'm saying that right, heliacal rising of Mars. So it was Mars had just appeared as a morning star on the new moon before I was born. And the reason I'm sharing that to me is kind of interesting is that well, like I moved to my Mars ascendant line, and if you look into astrocartography, a lot of times it's not really encouraged to move to your Mars ascendant line. And of course each chart needs to be looked at as a whole and considered with all of its parts and pieces, and the whole portrait of what it means. And I guess my point is, like, I don't think it was bad. I mean, I was drawn to my Mars ascendant line from across the country without ever having even been here before. It was just like a split second where I was like, that's where I'm going. And in a moment, I knew that I was moving here, and I didn't know how or where or what. And yeah. And I've been on my Mars ascendant line since. And so, and that's interesting because, well, I have Aries, Libra, lunar nodes, and the nodal axis is very important in evolutionary astrology. So In the before birth chart, Mars squares Pluto, applying. It's separating from that square when I was born. It's the ruler of my Aries South Node. And in the before birth new moon, the new moon is in a very tight square to the lunar nodal axes. And one of the details I didn't share on my last podcast was Mars is like 11 degrees applying to square the nodal axes and does square by house and sign. So in EA, we actually would look at that, and how we would look at that is it's not, like the intensity of a skip step square to the nodes is based on how close it is. Is it applying? Is it separating? How close it is? But the dynamics within the psyche will still be there. If it's even like 15 degrees before or after squaring by a house and sign, yeah, it's still worth talking about that, especially if it's a ruler of one of the nodes itself. So, but in this case, because it's 11, it's almost like it's this potential for that skip step to develop if things aren't integrated. And then the before birth new moon kind of further emphasizes that need to work on the resolution between the nodes. And so, like, my point is that there's there's a story that emerges from a chart, and so like one other story on my chart that I think is really interesting. So Venus would be the ruler of the Libra North node, and by progression, it's stationing retrograde. And so, like a Venus station retrograde in regular time, Venus slows down, stops, and then slowly starts going backwards, right? By progression, that actually equates to a 20-year period, and it happens to be stationing retrograde conjunct the Aries South node in the progress chart for 20 years. So that's kind of crazy. And so there's this whole theme of integrating the north node and the south node with the story, and the before birth new moon emphasizes all of that even more. And like Gray adding in that heliacal Mars point kind of like emphasizes the need to kind of go back and resolve that Mars Aries South node pieces that are unresolved. And yeah, got Chiron conjunct the Aries South node, and it's also conjunct Chiron's own South node in Aries. So anyway, like all that to say, you can see patterns and themes, and I've talked about this before, like the rule of three kind of thing. Like if it's one off thing, and from the EA point of view, if it's not a ruler of the nodes, if it's not the ruler of the ascendant, that's not really an EA thing, but that's something that I add in as a weighted factor. Or like just kind of like looking in the chart and seeing what story emerges, what archetypal theme is really prominent that might dominate the chart, and then what planet does that correlate to, or how strong in the story is the planet in question, right? Those are things to think about. But yeah, I always kind of get into that because we can get lost in the weeds, so to speak. I think we can, and it is important to have a foundation that you understand. And in my opinion, the EA Foundation's pretty simple thing to go back to. And yeah, so I'm gonna stop there. I this is just a short little chat, kind of like random, going off on this whole sun sign, or the kind of constant dissing of astrology as not a science. But okay, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, bye.